Beautiful is it's perhaps an unfashionable, perhaps even seen as a um, sentimental or a historically defunct discourse. Um, when in 1790 Kant wrote his Critique of Judgment, he wrote on two main categories. One was on the beautiful, the other was on the sublime, and the other consideration was ontology. But he wrote three critiques: a critique of pure reason, the critique of practical reason, the critique of judgment. Um, the first critique was in 1781, and it inquired as to what is it to know. And he wanted to know the conditions by which knowability occurred, and he concluded partly that the thing in itself was unknowable. So he distinguished between what was knowable and what was unknowable. The critique of practical reason was on the issue of morality, and is a question of what I ought to do, as opposed to what I should, how I should come to know. And the third critique, he was going to write on a critique of religion, but he found there was a gap between his idea of the realm of necessity, which is nature, and the realm of freedom, which is morality or ethics. And he didn't initially think that there was going to be a third critique on the idea of judgment of such things as the beautiful. Amongst the other things he discussed was the idea of genius, and genius is an interesting concept because it is that which doesn't follow rules, but as it were, makes its own rule up. So one of the things he was interested in the critique of judgment was the idea that this idea of that which defies rule and that which is outside of rule. So in his idea of the beautiful, it was, if I go into the slides, judgment of taste was a question of pleasure. And it opens out reflection and a form of detachment. It operates outside of rules, so it's detached from the world. And as such, it's a suspension. And it's the issue of the difference between presentation and representation. Representation, which is the first critique, really, is in German Vorstellung. So it's to do with knowability and a kind of grid by which the world can be known. Presentation is the faculty of the imagination, and it's outside of rule. It doesn't produce knowledge, it produces images. So let's go on to the slides. So I'm starting off with a quote from this sort of idea of perception of beauty, the beautiful. Ever since I saw the view of Delft in the museum in The Hague, I've known that I've seen the most beautiful painting in the world. So what it opens out is this idea of subjectivity, that the beautiful is in some way what the subject comes to feel is beautiful. It's not the object of attention, it's the relationship of the subject of perception perceiving an object of attention and finding it beautiful. It's what Kant called the free play or harmony of the faculties. So whereas the sublime is the discord of imagination and reason, the beautiful is the accord or the free play or the harmony of the faculties. So it's this you could call it a kind of suspension of a fixed relationship to cognition. So the beautiful was seen by Kant as being aconceptual, acognitive, not cognitive. So this is the Vermeer's view of the Delft, which was painted in 1660-61, and is in the Mauritshuis in The Hague. It's worth, if you're in Holland, it's worth a short journey from Amsterdam to The Hague and to see this painting. It's but so in his novel The Search for Lost Time, Proust stages a death scene of the writer Bergotti, in which he evokes his visit to see the view of Delft. In the meditation on his writings, Bergotti explains that his book had become too dry and that he shouldn't have made my language precious in itself, like this little patch of yellow, that little patch of yellow wall. So it's as if the idea of the beautiful takes in this case, the writer by surprise. He finds a little detail and fixes upon this detail, but it's not something that Vermeer designed as attracting the viewer to the element of the beautiful. It was, it's a sort of in the act of perception that something kind of comes to view. It takes him by surprise. And it's sort of interesting, this idea of it becoming, it's like kind of moisture becoming this patch of yellow. And he kind of equates, you've got this relationship to a death and this opening out of perception and this idea, the feeling that this language has become stiff and dry. Sort of interesting if you are writing, how to open out a capacity within yourself to touch something in yourself that isn't dry, isn't made by rule. Too much of teaching in schools is to teach you rules of the reiterative function of language, not the surprise of language, not the moisture of language, the soul of language. So this is Proust, and this is the little patch of yellow. So it's equivalent to his the awakening he has with the Magdalene cake. There's this flood of memory, but this also acts as a stimulus to imagination. It opens out imagination, which is the faculty of presentation. Presentation is the becoming of something. It relates to becoming rather than representation, which is the being, the fixed being, the stable identity of something. So it's something which you can almost imagine as a quiver, feeling of pulse of something. So the perception of the detail in Vermeer's painting is not unlike the perception of George G. Huberman's witnessing of a fresco, The Annunciation by Fra Angelico, in which he describes a mysterious sense in which the painting revolves around a whack of white. This is a marvelous painting in the, you see it in Florence, in the Fra Angelico Museum. You go up the stairs and you're struck by this painting, which is of itself pretty empty of all content, except that Didier Huberman saw within this painting a kind of almost invisible detail, a visible sense of the Annunciation being captured by this feeling of white upon white, an almost invisible gesture, almost imperceptible, and yet it opens out in the viewer the feeling of something miraculous, something that's opened both perceptually and in the actual iconography. That so rather than something being represented, it presents a condition of a kind of change in the principle of reality. The in this case, the Annunciation, the moment when the angel comes to visit Mary and announce the coming of Christ. This is a painting. Each of these in the cells of the priests, there's a fresco as if the fresco functions as a Bible, a fresco in a window in each of the cells, and as if one teaches by didacticism, by repetition, the reading of the Bible, and one teaches through perception, and the other through experience of light. So the relation between light and color and the word kind of create a condition of not just of learning, but of realization, of the coming to be of a spiritual condition. In both cases, there is a feeling of being taken by surprise. And one of my main theses about the beautiful is a condition of surprise. It's outside a determinate rule, outside of fixed qualities of design. It's something which erupts in the visual field or the perceptual field, or the sense of the unexpected detail erupting within the field of vision. Beauty here manifests itself in ways which connects with the feeling of autonomy, and as such is the suspension of cognition. This feeling of suspension is a mode of non-knowledge. So again, the beautiful in a way is the way of being in the world, which is outside of rule, outside of cognition, is a form of non-knowledge, is a surprise, it's like freedom itself is an eruption rather than something which is given. And returning to Vermeer, this glance of the eye, this look, it serves to open. It's almost again that she's taken by surprise and announces surprise with a glance of the eye. So again, it's almost imperceptible quality as kind of a little bit of white in the eye, catching the glisten of the eye, the shine, the opening out of vision. And it's as if both the eye and the pearl earring have a kind of similar treatment. And it's this enigmatic quality that has led writers to both works of fiction and films that followed the trail of this painting, as if it reveals something which is almost, it's worldly but out of this world simultaneously, almost miraculous, sort of rare quality, both on the level of form and so Kant theorized, this is in 1790 when he wrote the critique of, so he wrote the three critiques, which are it's called the subjective turn in philosophy, the how the subject comes to know or how the subject comes to feel something. So Kant theorized beauty as the harmony and suspension of the faculties, whereas the sublime is understood as being the discord of the imagination and understanding. So it's a theory. What Kant was theorizing is the notion of the philosophical notion of the subject and its faculties, and the difference between representation and which is Vorstellung, and Darstellung is presentation. So presentation is the faculty, is from the faculty of imagination. So Kant revived the centrality of imagination as a faculty of understanding the world. He said that it's the deepest starting point of the workings of the soul. And he had this theory in the first critique of schema, or schemata, which is the way in which imagination through the intuition presents to the understanding or cognition or intelligibility its findings, so it becomes available to the world. without which, without this mediation, nothing much would occur. So schema is an important piece of the intellectual architecture of Kant. And it's first found in the first critique. It's only about 9 pages long. But it's one of the key innovations of his theory of aesthetics. And Kant said there's two forms of beauty: free beauty and dependent beauty. Free beauty proposes no concept of which an object should be, whereas dependent beauty does propose such a concept, and consequently an answering in the object. So while beauty is self-subsisting, like a wildflower or a songbird is a free beauty. It's outside, it's got no design on beauty, it's independent of the world, it's, as it were, self-subsisting. Dependent beauty is conditioned on the concept of a particular end for a class of objects in which the objects belong. The hummingbird or ornamental form, which have no intrinsic meaning, represent nothing. They are free beauties, whereas the beauty of human beings, buildings, presuppose a concept of the end, of what defines the thing has to be, and consequently a concept for its perception. So this is he makes a distinction also of the sublime, which we'll talk about next term. He has free beauty, independent beauty, but also he has two forms of sublime: the mathematical and the one based on measurability and one based on force. A painting by Caravaggio of Bacchus, and the sense of in Caravaggio, this sort of moment of mannerism and the movement into mannerism into the Baroque. There's this sense of excess of sort of almost overripe image being occasioned by this relationship to the still life. So Caravaggio in a way inaugurated this relationship to still life, this visual excess, this within the lowly. Historical painting, history painting was seen as a high genre, whereas still life was seen as a lowly genre. But in a sense that this is a surprise of the still life, is the sort of pursuit of the beautiful within things in themselves. The other great philosopher of beauty, the beautiful in philosophy, is Hegel. Hegel followed Kant as an idealist. And Hegel introduced the idea of periodization in art, the symbolic, the classical, and the romantic, or the modern, or the Christian even. So Hegel discusses art as one moment in the absolute spirit, and with this, the notion of beautiful as this sensible appearance of the idea, like a sensuous shining. This implied truth could be experienced sensuously. So he related also the idea of the beautiful to also a teleology, a kind of periodization, which differs from Kant is a theory very much of form, whereas Hegel is much more a question of movement and dynamical relationship to becoming. So again, Caravaggio, Narcissus. We think of Narcissus as an entity caught up in his own reflection, but in a paradoxical sense, he can't quite see himself as he sees himself as other. Doesn't see it as enclosing self-identity or reflecting self-identity. According to Kant, art can only be beautiful if it appears in some sense as nature. and nature can only be beautiful if it appears in some sense as art. In order for the concept to take the form of an aesthetic idea, it cannot be a definite concept. If we discern the work of art is the intention to produce a definite concept, then the work, while perhaps it may appeal to our reason, cannot be said to be making appeal to our taste. To appeal to our taste, it must appear to us that the pleasure we feel is attributed to an object, as an object divorced from a specific end. So it's again that Kant introduces the notion that there's four moments of the beautiful. One is the quality of disinterested. It takes no interest in things as they are. It's universal, by which he means we don't all find the same thing beautiful, but we can agree that someone could find it beautiful. There's a agreeable sense to beautiful and universality in that respect. It's also the other moments of finality and necessity. I'll just read to you these four moments. Taste estimates an object apart from any interest, so it's without interest. So the songbird, for instance, doesn't have any interest in being a songbird, it just is. So it's this quality of in itselfness which can't be known. Beautiful pleases apart from a concept universally. It is a form of finality in an object apart from the representation of the end. So this idea of finality, and it is that which, apart from the concept, is cognized as an object of necessity or necessary delight. So these are the four moments of the beautiful. And this is Schiller, who says that through beauty we arrived at freedom. So this moment in European culture where the idea of the beautiful and the freedom is being linked together, it both has political implications and implications to the realm of ethics, and it's the early way. It's a way of linking the discourse of nature with that of art, but also linking the idea of the realm of aesthetics with the realm of ethics. One of the things I introduced was this idea that we'd find it hard to have a theory of ecology without a theory of the beautiful. Traditional Western metaphysics have invariably linked not only truth with light, but also the beautiful with the good. And in so doing, has transferred transcendental qualities upon it. Beauty is revealed through the medium of light, and hence its manifestation is a conflation of the visible and the invisible. Modern philosophy's enlightenment is the effort to bring light, often seen as reason, to all that which is previously held to be in darkness. The metaphor of the eye of the mind serves as a chain to link, as a link between the eye, mind, light, truth, beauty, ethics, as an unassailable paradigm of civilization. Likewise, the other schema is equally ready at hand in the form of the signifying chain of darkness, blindness, ignorance, ugliness, and evil. So it's this where, in a sense, the metaphysics of the Enlightenment project gets stuck, opens us out to a kind of realm of the abject. This is a painting from the Five Dynasties from the 10th century China. Birds by sketching life, Hong Quan. So it's just before the Sung, between the Tang and the Sung. Um, but in a sense, it's like the attraction of the beautiful in nature to the beautiful in art. This is Albert Dürer, and I think there's still time to see the Dürer exhibition in the National Gallery, which is marvelous. Wing of a Blue Roller from 1510. So part of the Renaissance and Enlightenment is this beginning to systematically study and classify not just nature, but the beautiful in nature. It's a quote I like from Simone Weil, the great French thinker. Beauty is a fruit which we look at without being able to seize it. This is Leonardo. So in different cultural, almost exact time across the globe, this kind of interest in almost the scientific and aesthetic classification and codification and opening out of wonder of the world, but also the classification of qualities and abodes. And this is Mughal India. This is from the 16th, 17th century Mughal period. That's through to the 18th century. It goes on to the 19th century. Declines. It's the height in the 17th century. There's a great painter called Mansour who specialized in painting birds. The emperors would get envoys to bring back descriptions or live birds for aviaries or dead birds to be transcribed into paintings. So they had albums of the paintings of the world and flowers of the world. Mansour was one of the great bird painters. This is Kasia Silverman. A work of art can only be made possible for others to see beauty where they themselves do not otherwise see it, and thereby expand their capacity to care. So again, this idea that the beautiful opens out this capacity of feeling and feeling of an accord with things, a care of things. So again, this relationship between the beautiful and the ethical. This is an Ottoman 16th century silk velvet, a metal thread panel. A lot of Ottoman textiles went through Venice into Italy, and very often Renaissance textiles have a very close relationship to Ottoman velvets and silks. This is Van Gogh. So it's not that flowers emblemize free beauty and an accord between the natural beauty and aesthetic beauty is to be found in these studies. Claude Monet, water lilies. Again, this aesthetic of moving up close, or a kind of floating world, a kind of dreamy quality in which there isn't a figure-ground relationship. There's a dissolve between the intellectual, the imaginative reverie and the perception of phenomena. It's Paul Clave fish magic. So again, this reverie upon the natural world, this meeting point between imagination and perception, and the world is opening out through imagination. Again, Kaja Silman, our capacity to signify beauty knows no limits, knows no limit, I think it is. It is born of a loss which can be never adequately named, and whose consequence is quite simply the human imperative to engage in ceaseless signification. It is finally this never-ending symbolization that the world wants from us. So as if the beautiful creates a sense of movement, and movement of becoming, a sense that it opens out the world. It's not, it resists what is stiff and what is too well organized, and loosens the world up, makes it breathe, makes it find fresh accord. So it's a kind of flutter of sense. This is Cy Twombly blooming from 2001 to 2008. Series of paintings he did on blooming of flowers. But again, this capacity to link the appearance of flowers with the opening out of imaginative space, a kind of overall saturation of figure, form, and color. And the dripping of the paint signifies the release. So if the world is melting, and we have in the 20th century a kind of view of the extreme conditions of the beautiful or beauty. So this is Rilke, the great turn of the century poet who worked with Rodin and wrote on Rodin. For beauty is nothing but the beginning of a terror which we are barely able to endure, and it amazes us so because it serenely disdains to destroy us. So this is a kind of version of beauty as taking us to a limit, not a sentimental view of beautiful, not a conflation with the pretty or the decorative. This is Jean Genet writing on Giacometti. Beauty has no other origin than the singular wound, different in every case, hidden and visible, which each man bears with himself, which he preserves, and to which he withdraws. I can't read the rest. The world for temporary but authentic solitude. So some feeling of, again, a sort of edge of the world, a kind of limit experience, some sort of singularity, state of singularity, a sort of internal limit, which beauty draws or inscribes within the subject. Something which is moved. Beauty with a kind of, not so much a force, because the force would be the dynamical sublime, but something which disturbs this straight route. It doesn't draw straight lines. This is Giacometti's portrait of Annette from 1962. And this feeling of a quality of oscillation, of suspension, of interiority is all captured by a lot of these portraits by Giacometti. In Roland Barthes' The Pleasure of the Text, the relationship between pleasure and literature is developed, and in this process he changes the two notions, shifting both the pleasure and the work from the logic of identity to experience of difference. Beyond pleasure, he discovers bliss, and beyond the literary work, he discovers the text. Bliss is a feeling which overcomes the distinction between pleasure and pain. It includes what is unpleasant, boring, and even painful. Bliss implies the loss of the subject, the disappearance and the fading of personal identity. I remember reading this out last week from Sugimoto, and he relates the feeling of the beautiful with that of the passage of time. What is truly beautiful is something that has witnessed or withstood time, time advancing with its unforgetting power to rot, intends to return everything to the soil. True beauty is that which has survived time and is preserved within color and form. At some point, will come a time when true beauty and a time when its color and shape will fade away. The world is interval, which something shifts from being to nothingness. Something in that interval, beauty sparkles like a riddle from a secret language. Hiroshi Sugimoto, the great Japanese photographer. My next focus on the spiritual and the sensuous. And again, I remember showing this one Buddha head from Afghanistan, from the 4th, 5th century, stucco head, with partly a fusion between early Indian depictions of the Buddha and the Roman Greek culture of depiction of so it's a kind of view that the sensuous and the spiritual should merge together, give an accord of the two realms. It's easy to forget now in the what's left over of Afghanistan, the absolute isolated and poverty-stricken zone it's become. What a great culture of the past it contained. So it's the fusion between the Greek ideal of beauty and the Indian symbolic aesthetic. In a geometrical harmony is married to the sensuous form of depiction in order to contain both the appearance of the Buddha alongside the feeling of his transmission. So it's both the outer appearance and the inner accord, which is depicted and presented and transmitted. For Hegel, Greek art reached its highest peak of aesthetic embodiment in this is Isis, I think, god Isis, river god. Again, Simone Weil, everything beautiful as a mark of eternity. So you often find a movement of two times, the idea of almost a flutter of time with the mark of eternity, sort of complex opening out of temporality, which is not singular, which isn't predictable, which isn't chronology, isn't chronos, is kairos, the coming in, the birth of time, with the memory of another time or an opening of time which is outside of time, time of the unconscious, of death. So it's often the case in films that, or in great poetry, where there's the some introduction of the idea of death and beauty is often drawn together, a sort of beautiful moment with this passing of time. This is from the Gupta period. Gupta period is in India in the 4th to 6th century, and is a great height of Indian culture and Indian aesthetics. So you can see a different level of sensuousness to the Greek ideal. We have the etheric body, not the gross physical body, not the appearance of the body, but the feeling of a spiritual body. And the decline after the Guptas of form is related to lots of connection between the spiritual and sensuous. Within the different periods, beauty has been an eruptive manifestation connected to freedom. So the height of cultures where there's often the greatest sense of expansion of inner feeling is often connected with the idea of the beautiful within the culture and the attainment of the beautiful. Sandra Botticelli. This is a painting which you can see in Florence, Birth of Venus. So often this sense of the birth of something, the gesture giving birth, gestures giving birth, or kairos, the generation of time. So often the beautiful is seen as that which arrives as a surprise, comes from the sea, comes from the sky, is to be clothed in human attire, to take the place in the world, but comes from the outside, from the sort of meeting point between sensuous nature and spiritual realization. Late modernity has seen an ambivalent relationship to the question of beauty. Objection, transgression, and spectacle have all in different ways become bearers of aesthetic discourse. The question of ecology is raised not only as the idea of ethics, but with this, the idea of beautiful as a symbol of morally good. So as if Kant's idea of this relationship to judgment, aesthetic judgment, being a symbol of the morally good, has been revived again. This is just 4 or 5 images of the beauty. This is Robert Mapplethorpe, his study of flowers. So again, this classical ideal with sort of sensual manifestation. The sense of this brief moment where the flower is full and open, and so just before the flower turns and fades. So again, it's from last week's Sanchai Juko, Memory Before History. Bodies which are cultivated not to be seen as modern bodies, but archaic bodies which have withstood time and endurance of time. It's Mustafa Alaisi, kind of meeting point between a schematic abstraction and study of flowers. So the Robert Mapplethorpe, Sanchai Juko, Sally Mann, the body, the child, and Mustafa Alaisi, a flower of dance drama signifying the beginning of the world, the presentation of the body, then suspensions and intensifications, all drawing attention to the visual forms of grace. Beauty serving in different ways as an attractor of the elsewhere. So rather than beauty being in place in the world, it's the elsewhere of the world, the yet to come. I went to see the exhibition of on Sunday, and I saw a book just of her face, and I wrote then just a face smiling back, confident of the next instant. Beauty is like that, a moment when everything comes to rest within the flutter of time passing. I don't know how long I've been going to the V&A, but every time I go to the V&A, I go and visit this Fatimid 10th century, 10th, 11th century rock crystal vase or vessel or ewer. It's almost a miraculous artifact. And I always feel I never get bored with it. I never get, it seems to hold its relationship to time. It sort of defies time. So it's 1200 years old. And it still has this quality to amaze and to, I mean, it's not just the craft, it's not just the fact that it's almost a miraculous carving out of pure rock crystal, which is stupendously difficult. But this way that the repetition of seeing occasions in each occasion a difference. Beauty is a process of repeated becoming, so it renews with me a kind of secret pact, a kind of relationship to temporality which is suspended. So each time it's anew. It's the same ewer, but it's different on each occasion, and so I keep on visiting. So it's 30-year ritual. Fatimid period was, I mean, this was probably made in Cairo. I'm going to play some Paco de Lucia guitar music. But he was one of the greatest flamenco guitarists of the modern period. But he embodied the aesthetic principle of duende, which serves to define a mysterious condition of flamenco art forms, functioning like a spirit form held within a counter rhythm. An attraction to what resides within the elsewhere creates a pulsation of attraction and power. Duende is like an off note. It kind of comes more from the Indian subcontinent through Egypt with the movement of the gypsies. So it's a kind of absence of harmony, a kind of off note, a kind of in which the spirit form, attraction, a pulse can occur. I was looking at these studies, of something like 56 studies of peppers by Edward Weston. And these were made in around 1929, 1930. And it's both highly formal yet sensual, defining the category of still life. He took 56 studies like this, or something like 56, each of these with various degrees of abstraction, which creates the sensation of oscillation of pure form and figural recognition. So this quality of oscillation of a form that moves, static form, it could be said to be a still life, but it's also something which has a movement to it. It's movement between static pure form and the movement of the mind in abstraction. This Chinese spirit stone, or these were collected from as early as the Tang dynasty in this sort of around about they derived from about the 8th century onwards. And very often scholars and painters would collect them. It's called Scholars' Rocks. This image below depicts the 11th century calligrapher Mi Fu bowing in front of a rock. The painting is by Guo Shi from the Ming Dynasty, but it depicts a painter actually bowing to the rock. Some painters would actually, there's one painter, is Mi Fei, I think it was, used to sleep at night with a rock under his pillow. So he used to find a kind of spirit form of other beings and other entities within rocks, a sort of memory form of otherness. This is a Zen monk. Rokan, a Zen master, lived the simplest kind of life in a little hut at the foot of the mountain. One evening, a thief visited the hut only to discover there was nothing to steal. Rokan returned and caught him. "You may come a long way to visit me," he told the prowler, "and you should not return empty-handed. Please take my clothes as a gift." The thief was bewildered, but took the clothes and slunk away. Rokan sat naked and watched the moon. "Poor fellow," he mused. I wish I could give him the beautiful moon." So again, this sort of inversion of a life story of what you can steal, you can't take, and what you can steal or take, you kind of miss something. So something's always there, but it's to be opened up by perception. In this case, perception of what you don't see as being a source of the beautiful, and the beautiful being the thing which brings richness to life. It could be a story for our times. The songbird, this is a bird in Uganda, and I was told, I had a tutorial, I forget the details of this tutorial, but the student had visited Uganda to watch birds, and that she'd seen a bird which was thought to be extinct. She thought the idea of seeing something no longer thought to be available to human eye touched a special nerve or an animating principle. This for her was a special kind of beauty because it opened out a condition of frailty. So that was just in the week, and I thought that's again another story of our time. The frailty of the beautiful in the world, the passing over the world, but also witnessing, and the special condition of witnessing and looking intently at the world and finding out what might be passed over, or what might be disappearing, or what's fragile within us, finding a renewal of perception. This is the writer Clarice Lispector, the Brazilian writer. And she writes in a book, Agua Viva, which is a wonderful novel. It's not a novel which isn't a novel. It's a really beautiful book. I've spoken a lot about death. Here we can see again this moment of this mention of death. But I'm going to speak to you about the breath of life. When a person is already no longer breathing, you give mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. You place your mouth upon the other person's and breathe, and the other starts to breathe again. This exchange of breaths is one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard about. Sorry, I spelled heard wrong. Heard about life. In fact, the beauty of this mouth-to-mouth is dazzling me. And in this book, I kind of read it, and I'm touched constantly about how some of the sentences just melt me, completely. It's about the now and this paradox of as soon as you focus on now, it's past and never can be captured. It's anyway, I recommend this book as a kind of, it's fragmentary writing at its best, but it's a beautiful book because it's without design, without conceptual. It doesn't even know itself as a book. It doesn't know what it is, or didn't know what it is. It's another kind of literature. This is a photograph of the great Japanese photographer Shomi Tamatsu. A breeze seizes hold of a transparent red curtain. Nothing much more occurs within this event. Beauty is often like this, a minor eruption recording the least condition of something, or just enough of the thing to gather hold of attention. So it's often at a condition of threshold where it's almost something's disappearing or only just happening, and finally, this is a minaret in what is now Iraq, but was built in Mesopotamia. It's 9th century. And it's a marvelous example of something which you don't quite know how to categorize where the beautiful lies, whether it's in the form of the ziggurat or whether it's in the experience of the ascent, which unfolds as the experience of leaving there to find kinship with the skies drawn ever closer. This expresses a perfect unity of material form and generative experience of this structure, as well as a chord of transience and permanence. It survived the Iraq War. And I thought, as a summary, I thought of writing 10 meditations on the beautiful. These were nothing original, but an attempt to codify the beautiful. Beauty is the free play and harmony of the faculties. Beauty opens out the capacity of reflection. Beauty lacks the rules that might be in place to generate it. Beauty draws things together, but also transforms this condition. Beauty is invariably linked to surprise. Beauty pleases without interest or reason. Beauty reveals something in the subject that is not already known. Beauty exists within the subject in response to the object of attention. Beauty exhibits itself as attraction, whereas ugliness is repellent. Beauty is a suspension or eruption. That is this continuous transforming what preceded it and what might follow it. I think the last one is a really interesting one because it links transience and with the idea of the beautiful, something which changes the condition by which we feel about ourselves before and afterwards. I thought the easiest way to understand the beautiful is the idea of the beautiful being discontinuous is like experience of wow. You know, when we say wow, it's like we move, but we don't find the language to. We're much closer to gesture, opening out gesture with ourselves, a kind of a suspension of faculties, a suspension of cognition. Our feet aren't on the ground anymore. I'm going to play you a few things. My chance to become a DJ for the night. Need to have some fun. So I'll start off with Paco de Lucia, and is playing in Rodrigo's Any questions, any thoughts?
Well, I'll jump in to start, Jonathan. I know in Kant that he refers to a lot of things back to nature. So is there any connection in philosophical thinking of beauty and nature?
Well, the critique of judgment, a lot of it is on the relationship of nature and the aesthetic of judgment, the perception of beauty within nature and within art. He says that we see the model of beauty in art as being in relation to nature and vice versa. So he sees a kind of direct relationship between nature and art, and a lot of it is on that. I mean, this theory of morality is also connected with the relationship which we have between nature and art.
Thank you.
I mean, it's 1790, but it kind of, if you substitute some of the language, it has a kind of an accord with the modern period, late modern period as well. It's not such an archaic text, not a purely academic undertaking.
And where would mimesis fall in regards to beauty, if at all?
The mimetic is connected with the idea of representation and the copying of appearances as they are. So in the classical sense, mimesis has got a very close relationship between classical aesthetics and but I think Kant was trying to get away from the purely mimetic and introduce the idea of the faculty of presentation, which is faculty of becoming and isn't to do with representation. So
thank you.
So to follow on that, there is that idea of beauty as a state, more so than the intrinsic quality of an object. So you are in that state, and therefore you see,
yeah,
or the object triggers that.
There's something opens within you. So it's this is why Kant says, in a sense, there's a condition of perception of beauty within the moral as well, the moral accord. So I think he says that the morality prepares you for beauty. It's not divorced from beautiful. So something moves within you, which is both moral and aesthetic. So it's apart from the concept, and it's not attached to the object, but it's connected to the object. So it can't be objectified; it can be subjectified. But a special condition of the object is revealed within that, something which moves.
And what did you mean by transcendent qualities? What do you intend by transcendent?
It's just a term for the philosophical enterprise of Kant. It's a transcendental principle of philosophy. It's dualistic. Kant's dualistic. He believes in the separation of subject and object. He inquires as to what conditions does knowability occur. He asks the question, what are the conditions by which we come to know? what are the conditions by which we come to do things in the world, and what are the conditions by which we might perceive such things as beautiful. So he wants to know about knowledge, this is epistemology, about morality and practice, and he wants to know about judgments of taste as a complete system of our relationship to the world. It's a kind of attempt of what's called the three critiques, and ultimately is inquiring into what is the condition of being, and the question of the beautiful is, and the question of aesthetics is primarily ontological. So it illuminates being. It doesn't lead to us knowing something, it leads to us feeling something and moving that condition of feeling into so you could say that the beautiful is an inscription process by which we expand our feeling for the world. If it's diminished, then we're diminished.
So in a certain way, it does still relate to the idea of transcending, as in transcending the minds, and then...
Yeah, it's the movement of the mind. It's an account of the movement of the mind. So it's an oscillation, it's a suspension, it's a flutter.
And how would that relate to, well, God or the everything?
Well, he used God as a last determinate principle. So he kept God out of it, but he still recognized the existence of God as a final determination. So he didn't have to make it, he didn't have to write his critique of religion. He decided to talk much more about morality and the good. So it's a sort of beginnings of secularization of, it's metaphysical, but it's still a secularization of theory. And it's the aspiration of knowing things as well as feeling things. It's not a dichotomy of the two. It's how the two fit together. I mean, we have a great, the Royal College is called a university, but it's essentially concerned with judgments of taste, and judgments of taste aren't subject to rules and law. And if they're not subject to rules and law, then they what are the conditions by which we judge? So do we give them a number or a quantity, like first class or second class or third class? I mean, we're pretending that it's still, we're producing knowledge, and that knowledge is quantifiable. But art is the production of the new, so it's outside of rule. So if we can't have a system which is predicated on judgment in advance of appearance. If you have the idea of rule, you have the idea that you can have modules, and if you have modules, you can have judgment. But this is treated as an epistemological enterprise.
Does that still apply if you remove beauty from the equation, as it seems to be the case?
Well, beauty is inconvenient.
Yeah.
Because it's got a disregard for the world as it is. It's interested in a new quality, new way of becoming. I don't want to get into this too much. But it's a sort of rather, you know, it's a schizophrenic environment when an aesthetic enterprise is institutionalized, and the institution itself wants rules and judgments of quality when it's quantitative. That doesn't mean you can't be involved in a conversation about qualities. And it's not that you can't use the word beautiful, and it's not that you can't have an interpretation of the beautiful, but it's contested. It's open always to continual modification. It's transient. It's
if we think beyond Kant, or if we don't take Kant into account, what would you personally think of the ideas of beauty as the state of witness of the divine or God? And then enlightenment, spiritual enlightenment, as ultimate beauty.
The beautiful is a portal to elsewhere, however we define the elsewhere. We could define it spiritually as a limit experience, or we could define like it says Russia invades Ukraine. That's why I played that last song. It's a kind of resistance to that ugliness. So it's sort of elsewhere. So whatever that elsewhere is in the world. Any more questions? Any more thoughts?
So is beauty transitory?
It comes and goes without regulation. I think it's close to an eruption, like freedom is. It's not a permanent condition that is given, and it's not by design. We can quantify good looks in things or good design. We can say that some proportions are pleasing. But that's not necessarily the idea of the beautiful. So I'd say it's more on the side of transitory, but as Simone Weil said, it touches upon the eternal, which is the elsewhere. It often creeps up on us from an unusual angle. It comes as with a feeling of fragility. So we're open to beautiful when we are at the most vulnerable sometimes, or when we're moved by something in a limit experience. So when we go looking for it, we can't find it. When we're not looking for it, we might find it, but it might strike us as being a surprise. So if you were to ask to write, I mean, I thought at the end I'd done this lecture before, and I didn't have the 10 cases of the beautiful. And I was thinking, well, if I was to be asked to recall beautiful things and things which I found touched by this idea of beautiful, these might be some of the things I was touched by. So one was last week, and one was on my last visit to Vienna, and one was a thought of Duende, and this kind of spacing, that beauty is a kind of spacing between notes, or the in-between of something, which creates a kind of spirit form, passage of a spirit, an attraction. So I can't make a program of it. You can't run a course on the beautiful. You can't. I mean, you could, of course, collect text together on the beautiful, but that wouldn't be necessarily lead to the perception of the beautiful. And one can have a course which is to do with aesthetic production, and it doesn't mean that anything beautiful is ever going to be produced. You can only prepare the mind for and the capacity and the faculties for something to occur. So every time you do something which moves something in the realm of the new, you expand the world's inner space. And that's what the work of beauty is to expand the world's inner space, not to contract it, which is what the ugliness does. Ugliness diminishes, beautiful expand. I mean, that's yeah, I'd stick by that.
Is beauty dependent on ugliness?
No. And most of the things in the world are neither beautiful nor ugly. It helps articulate it. That difference is there's a counterpoint.
Attention.
Well, it's the attention to things gives us a sensitivity to both conditions.
Tension, T-E-N-S-I.
Attention.
No, tension.
Tension, well, there's a tension between the two conditions. Yeah. So there's an attention to them and an attention to them. Which course are you on?
Print.
Print, okay.
What do you mean by spirit form? What is a spirit form?
Well, I was talking about spacing and about duende, and it's a quality of, I mean, technically it's like an off note, a counter note, a suspension of a note, and in between. But it provides for a circulation, a sort of calling upon spirits, if you like, in its in flamenco. So something moves. It's a spirit. It's an animation of something. Beauty is a kind of animation, a movement, a flutter of the mind. I played Paco de Lucia in classical mode, but I think he took some of the principles of duende into that. I thought maybe I wouldn't play anything because it would be like an illustration of the beautiful. So I don't really mean to say you should find them beautiful, but they, in different ways, shows how the rhetoric of the beautiful. And it's good to relax the mind after a lecture, which might have gone on for too long. I feel that learning comes with pleasure and with relaxation and a kind of an accord, harmonic principle between the speaker and the listener, such that something can move. That I go halfway in terms of producing a lecture, and the other half of it is produced by perceptions of the productive audience. It's a kind of I have this idea of aesthetic community. An aesthetic community is based upon the circulation of sense and of sharing, a kind of democracy of sense.
But beauty impacts on all the senses, wouldn't you say?
I'd hope so. But we shouldn't give it too much of a specified form, because we in waiting, and it's how we open for its accord. We don't know where it's going to come from, and we don't know where it lies in our lives. Only that it moves something, and so the least specification we give it, the better. But we need some
Form of reference.
We need some points of reference. I mean, Kant wouldn't have agreed with Rilke, but without Rilke, we wouldn't be given an idea of an extreme version of beauty, the beautiful. So it's kind of sort of poetic way of seeing the beautiful, something which moves us at the point of terror. So very much born of the 20th century. Any more thoughts?
Could you extend a little bit on the idea of truth, the good and the beautiful?
They're not a unity. If they're a unity, I mean, in aesthetics, there is a place for truth, just as a question of beauty is in place in aesthetics, and the morally good is in place in aesthetic theory. But they also belong to the realm of aesthetics, and it depends how you take truth. Truth can be a proof, a sort of epistemological condition whereby something equals something else, or it can be an occasioning of a condition. Greeks, the word aletheia was originally related to the appearance of a goddess figure. It was a figural condition in which there's also a relationship between truth and forgetting and remembering, or revealing and concealing. So we forget, in the modern world, we forget we go for a stubborn relationship to truth. Fixed condition of truth as proof, whereas the ancients might be much more on the side of something which is much more a witnessing or visual or way of becoming. A lot of theorization has become ossified. We want quick results. We want products. We want proof. A lot of things have come with naming. So like the Ukraine situation, it's partly naming, isn't it? Like, is Ukraine part of Europe or is it part of the Soviet Union? And is Taiwan an independent state or is it part of China? It's all to do with the power of naming. There's a story about Alexander the Great. When he went to northern India, he conquered the most part of the known world and achieved the status. He kind of said he was a living god. He kind of took seriously his visit to Egypt, and so he decided that he was part of the Egyptian tradition of being a living god. And his teacher was Aristotle, probably one of the greatest tutors the world's ever known. So his private tutor. And Aristotle, before he left for his world tour, said to him, if you go to a place called India, there are some wise men there, called yogis, I believe. But ask them the question is, what is the nature of being? So when he got to India, he got his keepers to go out and find a wise man. You know, they say they live in caves. And they found some bedraggled yogis and took them to the camp, and he asked the question, what is, through translation, what is the nature of being? And they wouldn't answer. So he threatened them a bit with things like death and torture. And one of them said, to save the others from death and torture, said, true being resides in all those that have not been seen by men. And he turned around and said, oh, what's this nonsense? And he says, well, to be seen is to be named. And to be named is to be put on the edge of extinction. So we're beings that place other beings in danger through naming. I thought it was a kind of, on an abstract level, a sort of interesting relationship to our conquest of the world through knowing, and through knowing, through controlling, and through controlling, introducing what is potentially ugly into the world, like pollution and weapons and monocrops and all these hyper objects which are in circulation.
But then if you back to the idea of like transcending the minds, what if the mind function was to name, to recognize, to know? And so there can be some truth found in that, and there is a function to that, whatever.
Of course, there's a function to knowing and naming, but it's how it becomes the relationship to power, and how we, at the same time as thinking we know, we also forget. I mean, a lot of great Greek tragic drama is to do precisely with that problem. The world of not knowing to do with the world of misrecognition, the world of recognition in relationship to the misrecognition which might come with it.
Yes.
The paradox, the thing which stresses oculocentric power is blinded by that power. This is why people are moved to talk about touch as a primary sense. Being we don't recognize touch enough. as opposed to vision. We say, I see, and stroke our chin, meaning I know. We conflate seeing with knowing. Anyway, enough. Last question. Next week is on the question of, or the exploration of the double sense of diagrams in art and diagrammatic. But what I want to look at is, in particular, work which, like the sketchbook or the notebook, or esoteric diagrammatics, or in Deleuze, the idea of the diagram or the diagrammatic. So it's partly a tradition which is like treating the canvas as a page, in which writing and diagrams and sort of mixed together with figurations, or sort of non-perspectival vision, a kind of something which is between writing and painting, or so that's next week. And thank you for your attention tonight and your capacities to listen and react. And it's also, we have a condition of learning here. It's outside of the curriculum. It's an additional forum. It's out of school hours. So you're free to come and free to go, and you're not judged. There's no marking. There's no. It's just whether you're here or not, and you might have been here by rumor, or so it's its own elected community. It's a aesthetic environment. It's a aesthetic community. Anyway, thank you. It's my